Thrilled to introduce Umashankar and has since then been building acoustic and other technologies along the way in relation to his own practice. I guess he didn't do such a thing for your journalism, but he was a journalist as his first professional activity, and then moved on to being a sound recordist for independent film, and soon after joined as the first employee of the archives and research center of Ethnomusicology, initially based in Delhi and now in Gurgaon, and worked there for 33 years as an audio technician, managing the audio media lab, which is actually one of the largest collection of sound recordings in South Asia. And hopefully we'll hear more about that. And then began his practice building listening to spaces in the 1990s with a site called Rani Gumpa. Probably also surface, but I won't speak too much about it. And that is when he realized that the technology he needed to build, to measure the acoustic properties of these sites, an ambisonic microphone, which was well beyond his means at the time. That's when his lifelong practice of making what he needs, working with what he has, building what cannot be bought, continued towards the design of ambisonic microphone, which he then termed Brahma for its four heads, and continues to then use that technology, and we've used it in the production of our show when we've gone back to sites to measure those sites with him. So thank you so much, Uma. And Tanvi, who is a professor at a university in Seoul and is working on, we had a workshop with her today morning, and she's working towards a manuscript called Listening to Difference. It was really quite exciting when Brooke brought Tanvi into the project, because it was like this missing link somehow, insofar as I think a latent critique of a certain kind of media archaeology as in its kind of approach to an embodied listening that I think our project somehow was seeing through, but not necessarily with the same kind of theoretical grounding that I think then your work brings to our project. So I'm really very grateful for that you're here, and I have to thank Brooke for making that connection. So I'll hand over to both of you.
Well, first of all, thank you, Brooke and Nida, for inviting me here. It's a huge honor to be in conversation with Uma, whose work I was introduced to once I became part of this project. So we've heard, I think most of you probably know quite a bit about Uma, but I wanted to start my questions with your habits of listening, because as we've heard from Nida, you've worked at the Archive Research Center for Ethnomusicology. You've heard 25,000 apparently 25,000 hours, 6 to 7 hours a day of I guess folk music, primarily when you were working there. But maybe we can talk more specifically about that. But what drew me there were certain points in your essay on how you became an acoustic archaeologist, where you said that there were certain moments when you started to listen differently. So you said that Rani Gumpa opened your mind and ears to an entirely new way of listening, and then you said that when the ambisonic microphone entered kind of your work, your ears started understanding subtle phenomena you never heard before. And then also at your time in art, you wrote that listening to these recordings for hours helped you learn subconsciously how people produce music. So I'd love to hear about your kind of like your own listening habits, or how those changed and were affected by all of the work you've done in the archives and with measuring Rani Gumpa.
Am I on? It is a very large question, and it starts very early.
because see what had happened to me was I was a radio listener, shortwave listener, interested in distant faint stations. And I was also building amplifiers and things like that without equipment, without measurement systems or anything. And you are forced to listen very carefully to an amplifier you have built to find out what is wrong with it. It gives you an analytical tool. You're not just listening to sound, you're listening to errors in the sound, errors in the performance of your electronics. Similarly, listening to radio stations, you learn to recognize a lot of details that you would not if you're listening to content. One of the things with shortwave listening is you're not listening to content, you're trying to identify the stations. So you listen very differently. And fortunately for me, in the 60s, BBC started a whole series of programs on hi-fi relating. It had just begun. There are lots of words being thrown around, and BBC decided, we'll tell you what it is. What is class D distortion? How does a scratchy needle sound? There are things you cannot theorize. They took a piece of Mozart and modified it in different ways with added bow and flutter, things like that, so you could recognize the bow and flutter. So I learned a lot of technical listening through this kind of things. So when I started becoming a recordist, it was very, very useful. But I wasn't going to become a recordist, I was going to be a journalist. It was deeply felt this thing, and as soon as I finished college, I went into the Indian Express office and asked them to give me a job. It took a while because I was very underweight. They didn't want to give me a job. In fact, the editor said, why don't you do an MA? I will help you get into an MA because you're too small to get you. So, but I just by persistence I became. Then, what happened, one of the things that happened, these things you don't plan. I, with a colleague, started an arts page. In Madras, weekly arts page has a lot of reviews of music concerts. Very little of art and very little of theatre, but lots of music. So I had to make rules. And there would be something like 7 or 8 concerts every day, and the season there'd be 100 or 200 concerts every day. You have to decide which ones you're going to cover. And I wanted some kind of transparency in what I do. So I wrote a little piece which I repeated every year, saying these are the concerts that get priority. And it doesn't matter if MS Subbulakshmi is singing, she has already sung 5 times in Madras, we don't need it. But we'll definitely want people who are performing without amplifiers. Because one of the horrors of Carnatic music, it still is like that, I suspect, was you may have a great singer, she's sitting in front of a 20-rupee microphone and singing into horn loudspeakers that are normally used for political announcements. And they would have a lot of them, so they would be interactive and terribly. And the audience, of course, didn't mind because they came there to have a chat. So it was anger at these things that drove me, how people were missing. You see, I could go home and listen to Miss Subbulakshmi on a cheap turntable and hear better sound than I could in the concert. Really good. So I said I will give priority to performances that use no electronic amplification. And I kept that rule. And of course, we also said we do only one review for a performer in a year. You don't get a second review. Unless there's a newsworthy incident during the performance. So, and we kept that rule. And so there was a need for good sound in my head, that is not available publicly. And one of the things was hi-fi and stereo were becoming a little more popular in India. But the money you paid had no relationship to the quality of sound you got. And that's one of the reasons I was building amplifiers, and I was building it for a lot of artists who also didn't have money but wanted to do good music. And so I got better at it because I was building them. But I had no intention of leaving journalism. I thought it would be a lifetime thing. And I like Indian Express. But then politics intervenes. And it intervenes in a way you don't expect. overnight there was censorship in the paper, and I said I don't want to work under censorship. So I left. I had no idea what I was going to do. I came to Delhi to deliver a pair of speakers for a friend, and I met somebody called Krishna, who was at that point a historian, teaching history at Ramdas College. Hated the job, wanted to make films. And I didn't know what I was going to do. No ambition at all, but I needed to make a living, that I did. And he was offered a job to make documentary films on science. And because I was writing about science in the Indian Express, he said, come join me, we write the scripts. And I discovered we didn't need to write scripts. The idea is we needed to make a 15-minute black and white documentary, silent in that. We didn't need much work. But we did need a sound recordist. And so I became a sound recordist because of need. And of course, all the things that you have taught yourself over time, they come back to you. And they're there in your head, you're not used them. One of the things was what kind of sound works for what purposes. And I heard about a lot of these mics, reading journals like Wireless World and Studio Sound, but I have not seen them for these professional equipment because I never did professional sound. These people have professional equipment like the shotgun microphones. So suddenly I was with very good equipment. So it's a great pleasure doing things. And that's how it began. And after a while, one had to leave this job because they weren't paying me enough to pay my salary, to pay my house rent. So I had to find something more to do. I became a freelance sound recordist. And shortly after that, I made friends with Tanvi boy from UCLA. Mainly because we both like drink. And the point was, he wanted to start, he was very passionate about starting an archive in India. He is Indian, but he had a Canadian citizenship. At that point, I think he's already gotten American. He had many citizenships in his life, but he was a Gaudi Gora from Bombay. And he very, very seriously interested in preserving Indian music. And one of the things that would happen all the way from Silvan Ravi's time was music would be recorded if they could. Most of the time they wrote notation rather than record. And it would go off abroad. Nobody in India saw any of these recordings. The recordings were everywhere in the world back in India. And even there, a lot of the recordings are not publicly accessible. For instance, a PhD student comes to India, records for 3 years, solidly, very good equipment, goes back, writes his dissertation. But his job is not going to be in the subject in which he's got his PhD. He's going to teach ethnomusicology, but not Indian music. So, their tapes will go off to one corner of the cupboard, and after a while they'll forget about their existence here. So, and they did recordings when nobody else was recording. That was the real reason for starting the archive. And there, of course, you see, one of the things with the archives, part of my listening experience, is that a lot of the recordings are done very poorly. Because people are not sound recordists. They have come to do their research, they want to keep their notes, more important to write notes than to record. Sometimes they forgot to start the record at the beginning of the performance. But they did, but there's a huge amount of material that would otherwise be unavailable. And this was coming every day to me. And when I go to the office, I did not know what music I was listening to. Again, I'm saying if you're oriented to content, you're not going to be seriously interested in the quality. You're not going to listen to the material. The content takes over. Of course, it takes over everybody. It takes over even somebody like me would say, I don't care for content. Any music that comes to me has to be treated equally seriously. But you do listen to music. I mean, I did. I had several streams of liking. But you have to keep it out. For instance, I copied about 4 hours of a performance in Nepal, in Kathmandu. And there's an old man reciting the names of the rags in the Nepali system of classical music and singing them live, melodic live. Only problem was it's completely flat. It didn't have any tune in his head. There was too much to have it. But so About 4 hours, somebody came into the room where I was doing, said, how can you listen to it? I said, the man is giving you the notation, telling you what notes are going. And he, in his head, is hearing it. So, you have to take him seriously. And, this is probably the last person who knows all the names of the Japanese style of music. So, there are many reasons for a particular recording, and you have to take the recording seriously regardless. And you have to take a performer seriously, because that's one of the things you learn, Way back when I started in ERC, she died last year. She was saying there are 2 forms of classical music in the world, and I always pop up with these. They said, yeah, Hindustani and Carnatic. But the thing was, at that point, I had to find a definition of classical music, which is not entirely Western classical music. And there was a desire for a lot of Indian performers, musicians or singers or dancers particularly, they were inventing classical dance, which didn't exist 100 years ago. Bharatanatyam is 1920s. Kathakali, Odissi is a little, Kathakali existed, but nobody wanted to call it classical. So, the need to have classical performance was felt right from the beginning. And this is what happens when you get into a lot of these things. I was listening to a lot of performers, and I listened to a lot of performances, especially in Rajasthan. And performances like Bhopa, which are technically ritual practices, not performance. But the audience said, so and so does the wedding songs very well. So they were distinguishing between Bhopa performers for their ability to do particular elements of the performance. The Bhopa the story is about 11 days long. There are about 5 or 6 weddings and 7 other wars and accidents and deaths. And every one of them will have songs. But some people did some songs better than the others, and the audience identified. So does that make it classical? There's a critical system. There's a theory of criticism behind the listening of even a folk performance. So I stopped saying it, I don't like anybody calling a performance folk performance. They are traditional performance, but not folk. I don't like the negativeness of it. But you see, you listen to so many, and I from 1982, at least till 2005 or 2010, I listened to everything that came to the archive. There's a lot of it. And because I had 25,000 hours in the archive, so I heard at least 2/3 of it. Some of it would come pre-recorded. Somebody had already made the transcription and made the notes and sent it. But a lot of it won't be like that. They're on their way out, bring their tapes and say, please give it back tomorrow, I'm leaving. So you had to copy. Work nights in the beginning. But digital became easier. You just take their mini disc and copy it, or now they come with that. Just connect your this thing, and 5 minutes later your collection is copied. So it wasn't like that in the beginning, and a lot of it. So, but what it did, I'm talking in terms of what it did to me, not what the archives has. You see, I had to learn to listen very carefully to material that is not in very good quality, and I had to listen very carefully to a lot of traditions I had not even heard of. Every day somebody comes to the collection and says, this is a performance from northern Andhra Pradesh, and I'm in Andhra by nature, but I have not heard of that performance. So there's so much material in India, it's an amazing density of material. So I heard a lot of things, but I won't say I have heard even a fraction of the majority of the material in India. But what I did was, you see, every one of these performers, some of them are dirt poor. One of them is actually a beggar, but he also sings. But every one of them tunes his instrument with great deal of care and practices every day to sing correctly. And that is there in every tradition in India. It teaches you to listen to them with as much care. It gives you a concentration. You are not casually putting on a tape and going away. You have to listen to what they have done. it becomes your responsibility to listen to it, and that's where the background comes. And then, all these years as a sound recordist, and another thing, again, I'm saying I don't listen to content, but a lot of it is content and not the context. And suddenly, Tom Alt, who is a professor of theatre history in Pennsylvania, he wanted me to measure Radiophile acoustics with the intention of proving it to theatre, like Bharata's theatre, not any theatre. So I went there, and no real expectation, because I knew enough about acoustics, I read the early papers about acoustics saying, warning, saying don't think because a space has good sound that it is intended to be good. A lot of stone structures tend to have very good sound regardless. And for instance, the Capitol in Washington is a whispering chamber. If you speak in one edge, 180 degrees, you will hear it. That's because it's curves. The shape, the geometry that is here. Nobody planned it. So I wasn't expecting to find anything particularly interesting. But I went there, it was really a shock. How different a place, outdoor space can be if it is intended. That's where my project journey actually starts in acoustics, because I had to find out, it is an open space, it's an outdoor space. But 1,000 people can hear you if you talk, if you are in a space that would be the stage of the theatre. And if you get off it, that effect it's really strong effect. Even after all the building, the bushes have planted, the effect is still there. But when I went first, it was there, and it's really dramatic. And then you start asking questions about, suddenly you're not listening to what is performed there, but how does it sound when anything is performed. Initial thing was, of course, you are saying, what was performed here? Because it's the Bharata's theatre, the two-stage theatre. See, that plays were not written at the time this was built. The plays covered 1,000 years later. So, but I already lost interest in that. I was interested in, even for something, a political speech that has been made. They meant it for a certain purpose, which is sound. And I had to understand how this works. And we don't get much help from Archaeoacoustical Society. And in fact, they don't even bother to measure very carefully. They have these huge maps, detailed things. Then you look at, open one of their measurements, and that's not what it is. And because the backs and the floor and ceiling, they're all curved. They have not measured the curvatures because they said that is because of inaccuracy of construction. They literally say that. The fellows don't know how to cut flat lines, but on the stage side, there is a section which is 3 meters wide and 18 meters long, which is like a mirror. Those guys could do that, but they come inside. It was not an accident. They were doing it. We don't know what the purpose is. Now I think it's acoustics, but it had in 1993. I didn't know much acoustics either. But all I knew was there were these curvatures which have to be taken into account in sound. So we actually sat and measured the curvatures. And then I got a little more ambitious. I tried to build a 3D model. There are programs called Cat Acoustic. There are several others. And Cat Acoustic, the free model works. You don't have to. And so I used it to build a model. And my idea was, I remove all these curvatures. I remove all these subsidiary spaces. Which one is affecting the sound most? Of course, I couldn't do it, but it forced me to do a lot of work. It took me a year to build that model. The software is a lot more difficult to use. But that's it becomes, and even then, even when I had all these measurements, and then I sent the model to the author of the software, and he processed it and said, if you remove the back chambers, this is what it will sound like. So I could see the back chambers had a huge effect on the sound. And I was still not willing to say that this is some kind, when I went to do a seminar in Brown University, Professor Pringle was there. And he said, don't say, they had some early acoustics that we don't know anything about, and don't say anything about conics. Ancient Sanskrit scholars did not know about conics. I said, fine, I'm not trying to talk about conics. And I am already interested in what they are. These are built by what they, the only tools they had were the hearing. And it began to look like listening becomes the most important aspect of this. But I still didn't want to say at the end of 5 years worth of work on Ranigumpa that this is what this sound means. I wrote the measurements down and said, it's for you. Those days you only did a text listing of the measurements, and because that's one of the reasons I went into ambisonics. Because ambisonic measurements give me one advantage over other kinds of measurements. I can take the impulse response measurements that I have done, process them with a recording to see what it sounds like with current performance. I can take somebody into an anechoic space, not even a dead space, put a microphone in front of him and play the sound through a processed filter from Ranigumpa or any other place. And then about 2015 or so, I retired and then I started, we got a couple of grants, Nida, myself and Robin. One grant was for measurement of 4 sites, and 3 sites. And then I went back, in that I went to Anupu for the first time. No, I went first to Thrissur, Kuthambalam. And Kuthambalam was already switching me on to something else, which was they all have similar sound. The Kerala Kuthambalam is built of wood, but it has got a 1-inch, 2-inch thick copper roof. You don't know why, it is not there for protection. It had some effect on the sound. The copper is very dense. And this very open space with wooden pillars sounds somewhat similar to Ranigumpa, which is open space. So there was some aesthetic working all the way to the 13th century, and that's 3rd century BC and this 13th century AD. So there is something shared, but I still didn't want to commit myself to saying they have a shared aesthetic. It is only when I went to Anupu, which is built completely differently. It is built, it's a Greco-Roman amphitheatre, open square place. We saw the picture, a lot of pictures in this thing. But it has a very similar acoustic. You talk on the 2 spaces on top and everybody can hear it. And the Archaeoacoustics Survey had woken up to acoustic probabilities when they wrote this report. They said it is probably the slope of the mountain behind it that created it. Could be, because they have reconstructed, so we can't say exactly what it sounded like about 30-40 years ago. But what you realize is, now I am beginning to say, I have heard 3 spaces carefully, and I think they have some shared acoustic aesthetics of sound, and that you need to see more than one place to start saying that. Very good sound in 3 places is 3 completely different contexts. Now I have to see more places. I don't think I'll be able to, but they're there. I mean that's the kind of that's why I said your question is very big, because it covers the whole of my listening experience.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, I was hoping. I apologize that to spend so long answering that. But I just wanted to comment on what you said about the archaeological survey of India. It seems like, just from what I read, it seems like there's a pretty kind of not.
But they are a little more helpful now.
They are.
A little more, not really. But when I went to get permission to go to Anupu.
Yes.
Yeah. No, when I went to get permission for Anupu, of course they took a week to see me, and I have a family in Hyderabad, so it wasn't too expensive. And then when I saw whatever the local authority guy was, he was extremely friendly. They are so happy to see you and all that, and gave me permission right there in front of me. And then he said, "Will you do one favor? You see, we have this." What is that fort in Hyderabad? Famous Golconda Fort. They had done some repair work. The Golconda is famous for one place near the gateway. If you clap there, it can be heard deep inside. And this is a very famous one, everybody goes to clap there. Suddenly, they had done some repair work and the echo disappeared. So they wanted me to go and find out what they had done wrong. And they're not willing to pay. They said, can you ask IS to give you a grant to do it? I said, no, I can't ask any more grants. I already got 2. So they wouldn't give me money for doing it. And I said, it will take 5 or 6 people to do it because you have to set up building stations all along and measure. No, they wanted me to do it as a return favor for giving me permission. But it's better, at least they're realizing that the echo was actually lost because of some stupidity they have done. So that's better than before. First time I went to Nadigunpa, 2 o'clock in the night, we were doing measurements. And this head of the local ASI boss, he was there. He's sitting with me and I was on my laptop trying to figure out. This is the second day, first day I didn't have a laptop. He looks over my shoulder and says, you can hear them. I said, hear what? He thought I had some technique for listening to voices all the time. So I said, no, I can't hear it. That is not what I'm trying to do. So you get these things. You see, probably is very well trained in archaeology, but he hasn't trained in acoustics. And he is not clever enough to hide his lack of knowledge. So that happened.
Yeah, no, I just from what you were saying about them, it seemed like they had this preconception about like these historical artifacts.
And you see, it all comes from Alserkal and Co. I mean, put concrete and everything is fine. Pour a lot of concrete and he did that in this place, Madras. Where he reconstructed three types of stairs. He rebuilt the whole thing. So you want to see what it looks like. But ASI has that problem. See, ASI has some skills which are very valuable. They can date a coin within 50 years. They're very good in numismatics. They can read almost all the inscriptions in India. And we have many kinds of skills. And third, if you give them an idol, they will tell you very personally from the iconography. It has been very well studied. But Rajasthan doesn't have idols, it doesn't have coins. What do you do? They don't even know what to date it for. The James says the 14th century, so you say 14th century. Next day somebody else says, no, it's 3rd century BC. It's around Ashoka style. And it's one of the earliest full-blown architectural spaces. Sarnath is a little older maybe, but it's actually better built than Sarnath. Sarnath is Buddhist because it doesn't have anything like that. The only reason for suspecting some Buddhist element is the number of elephants here. Huge, and that's a very Buddhist thing to do. Put elephants all over the place. So, but apart from that, there's no real evidence of what this place stood for. Because it has no iconography. And there are lots of carvings, but it looks like storytelling. And I was wondering if it is an early version of Ramayana, because Buddhists have the Ramayana version. Because there's one hunting of the deer, there's some girl being abducted, all those are there in the scenes in the back. But it's like if you take away their expertise, they stumble. And then they have to, it becomes very political. And it's become very political. There's absolutely no, I was wondering why would they prefer Jains to Buddhists? There's a general tendency to prefer a Jain monument to a Buddhist monument. And I have decided for myself that because Buddhists became neo-Buddhists, modern day Buddhists are Ambedkarites. So you don't, you wind back, this is definitely a Buddhist site, let's not say it's Buddhist. You get that in...
So they were kind of very visually oriented, and they didn't really...
No, it sounds like... I don't know what their training system is. even the National Museum in Delhi, they had a very good teacher who set up a museum institute in Delhi. While he was there, he produced extremely good students. Because I met quite a few of them. Some of them even joined the archives for a while. And the National Museum is now trying to denationalize itself and become something else altogether. Because it was set up very, very well. But that's the immediate post-independence. It's got a very good tribal art section, which most museums don't have in India. They would rather have whale skeletons rather than tribal art. But there was that.
So, just want to change to, I mean, so you were also writing poetry while you were...
Not while, I've always written poetry.
Oh, okay.
From the age of 17 or 18.
Right, yeah, so you never stopped.
No, I haven't stopped.
Okay.
I still write. Not immediate, but
And I think you'd also said that you had a kind of a deep knowledge of Sanskrit and Kalidasa.
No, I did not have a deep knowledge.
No, but you had some.
I can read
You were
it.
interested, yeah.
Because of the script. Because in South India, a lot of Sanskrit is written in Telugu script. So you can read it. And second thing was I had to do Shakuntalam as my text. You know, the South Indian BA of that time, I was doing mathematics. But you were expected to do 2 English texts. Shakespeare, actually, not any texts. I did Hamlet and I did Tempest and Hamlet on the text. And in Telugu script, the same, my text was Shakuntalam in Telugu. But then the professor who was going to teach me, was a very eminent scholar with one student. So he said, let's forget this bad translation in Telugu, let's do the Sanskrit version. So of Shakuntalam, I studied in Telugu script, but in Sanskrit. So I see that Telugu is comfortable that way. You can follow a lot of Sanskrit word for word because Telugu has this rule of satsama and tathava. That which is like Sanskrit, that which is Sanskrit. So anything grammatically correct in Sanskrit is grammatically correct in Telugu. So there have been poets who have written in Sanskrit and whatever I say in Telugu. So he taught me not just Sanskrit, 2-year course, you see. So after that, he said, let's do theatre, let's do Bharata. And he took me through that entire thing of, not the Nacharanga part, the rest of it, you know, Sandhi, about Raga, this thing, all the emotions, and, you know, the idea of Sandhi is connections, and you know, how a play is constructed. I thought it was a stupid way of writing a play, but one did a lot of reading, you know, the 5 kinds of plays, and all that one did. But I'm not a Sanskrit scholar.
Yeah, no, I just asked because of the connection between poetry, Sanskrit, and sound. I don't know.
No, they connection between Sanskrit and sound. But if of English, it is actually mathematics and Sanskrit. He insisted that it actually is not language, it's mathematics. But he even put a board on this thing in brown saying Department of Ancient Mathematics. But not really, you know, one should not claim to things that one hasn't done. We have done plenty of things, but not a scholar.
Well, I was just interested in kind of seeing if you saw a connection between your poetry and your...
Well, you see, my poetry, one of my interesting poems is actually based, modeled on, not based, on Tchaikovsky's 5th, I think. 5th Symphony, I think. So now I can't tell you what the link is, but when I was writing, that was the link. I was modeling it moment for moment. But you know, these things, when you are writing, you have certain motivations that 50 years on, you won't remember those.
Was that when you were still listening to the kind of traditional Indian
music?
No,
we won't say classical tradition. I listened to a lot of classical music, mostly Carnatic at that point. Later on, a lot of Hindustani music. I had a lot of friends who were Hindustani musicians after I came to Delhi. I learned to listen to a lot of jazz, and I listened to a lot of Western classical music. I listened to all 4 kinds, independently. I didn't try to synthesize anything from them. When I listened to Bach, I heard Bach. I wasn't interested in saying this is like in fact, Bach was the easiest classical Western music to enjoy for an Indian music student.
Oh, yes. So, any questions from the audience?
Hello, yeah. I think my question is about your poetry. The way you write is, I kind of felt that it has to do something with the sound of the memory, maybe, you had. And if I can ask about your poetry, what is it about?
See, a lot of more recent poems have been about sound. So you can read them, and a lot of them are on Facebook as well. And of course, there's a volume. But sound was important right from the beginning. This poem I said is for 3 voices. It was meant to be performed by 3 loudspeakers on a stage, on a darkened stage, and the 3 voices coming out of the 3 loudspeakers. It was very much a sound experiment. So this is 1973, so it's a long time ago.
Is it in English or what language?
English. It's the only language you can manage, so to speak.
Thank you.
That's why I didn't want a Sanskrit scholar. No, I will never be one.
So unfortunately we have run out of time, but thank you so much, Uma, for those very, very rich, detailed answers. I learned a lot about your kind of habits of listening, and even can sense some of the links with your poetry. So thank you, and thank you to the audience for listening. And I think if you have any other questions for Uma, you'll be around for the rest of the day.